It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that usually passed unnoticed in the busy world of luxury and high-end shopping. The hum of soft music echoed throughout the elegant store, where sparkling jewels, each more dazzling than the last, glimmered in their glass cases. The air was filled with an aura of exclusivity, as if only the most important and wealthy individuals could afford to step through the glass doors. Employees, all impeccably dressed, floated through the aisles, assisting their clients with a smile and the kind of polished professionalism one would expect in a place like this. But today, something was different. An elderly woman, dressed in simple yet elegant attire, entered the boutique. She moved with a grace that belied her age, her face soft, yet carrying a quiet strength. Her presence was unassuming, but her eyes told a different story, one that hinted at a lifetime of experiences, of wisdom gained through the years. She was the kind of person who might go unnoticed in such a luxurious environment, but there was something about her that made you pause if you took the time to really see her. As she made her way toward the displays of gold necklaces and diamond rings, one employee, a young woman in her mid-20s, noticed her. Her name was Sophie, and she prided herself on the impeccable service she offered to every customer. Sophie had been working at this high-end boutique for years, growing accustomed to the lavish tastes of the clients who regularly shopped there. But today, her attention was drawn to the elderly woman who seemed out of place, perhaps unaware of the prices, the status that came with purchasing such luxurious pieces. It was rare to see someone like her in this store, someone who didn't have the obvious trappings of wealth. Sophie's judgmental gaze swept over the elderly woman's attire, dismissing her as just another, out-of-touch customer. The woman had wandered to the more modest section of the store, the pieces that were still beautiful but far from the extravagant diamonds and rare gems. Sophie's patience was already thinning. After all, she had to deal with customers who were, in her eyes, more deserving of the store's attention. Sophie was used to the rich and famous, accustomed to lavish orders and the praise that came with closing high-ticket sales. But this woman? She wasn't worth the effort. With a huff, Sophie approached her. Her voice dripped with an overly polite but sharp tone that was intended to show her superiority. "Can I help you with something, madame?" she asked, not really offering assistance, but making it clear that the woman was an intrusion in her perfect world. The elderly woman looked up, her eyes kind but weary. "I was just admiring the pieces," she said in a soft, calm voice, her fingers brushing lightly over the jewelry in front of her. "They're lovely. I used to buy similar pieces for my family many years ago." Sophie's smile tightened, her gaze narrowing. "I'm sure you did, but these are quite different. These pieces are for people who understand luxury," she said, her words carrying an undercurrent of judgment. She continued, almost condescendingly, "I'm not sure you'll find anything here that would suit you." The elderly woman, taken aback by the comment, offered a polite but tired smile. "I suppose not, dear." Sophie barely waited for her to finish speaking before turning to walk away. She didn't give the elderly woman another glance, assuming she would leave soon enough without any issue. Sophie had dealt with people like this before, the ones who didn't fit into her world of high society and opulence. It didn't matter to her whether the woman had lived a life filled with priceless memories, or whether she had once been a part of the very world Sophie sought to uphold. To Sophie, the elderly woman was just another invisible figure, one who didn't belong here. But unbeknownst to Sophie, there was far more to this elderly woman than met the eye. The elderly woman, whose name was Elaine, had been living a quiet, almost secluded life for years. After the passing of her husband, she had left the limelight, choosing to retreat into the background. She had once been a part of a world filled with wealth and prestige, surrounded by jewels and luxury far more extravagant than anything Sophie could ever imagine. What Sophie didn't know was that Elaine had been a part of an exclusive circle of people, an elite world of celebrities and high-profile figures. Most notably, She was the mother of one of the most beloved and well-known figures in Hollywood, Keanu Reeves. The world didn't know much about Elaine, for she had chosen to stay out of the public eye, preferring to keep her personal life private. But behind the simple, quiet exterior was a woman with a rich history, a history that Sophie could never have guessed in a million years. And it was this very history that would soon come to light, in the most unexpected of ways. As Elaine turned to leave the store, her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. She retrieved it and read the message, a small smile appearing on her lips. Sophie felt the heat rising in her chest, her pride stung by the sudden confrontation. She had always been in control, the one who knew how to charm the wealthy, the famous. She prided herself on recognizing status and wealth with just a glance. But this was a different situation altogether. Her judgment had been clouded by assumptions, and now she was facing the consequences. She had been wrong, and in front of everyone. The other employees, who had been quietly observing from a distance, began to shift uncomfortably. The manager, who had been too preoccupied with a phone call to intervene earlier, now stepped forward. His face was tense, a mixture of disbelief and concern, as he looked from Keanu to Sophie. It was clear this was a situation he didn't know how to handle, one that went beyond the usual sales etiquette. Keanu's gaze briefly flicked to the manager, and he gave a slight nod. "I trust this won't happen again," he said, his words leaving no room for negotiation. "Sophie, I hope you understand that this is about more than just a sale. It's about human decency." Sophie's throat tightened as she tried to speak, to defend herself, but her voice came out strained, almost trembling. I didn't know. I didn't realize." Her words faltered, and she took a step back, her eyes now fixed on the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Elaine, however, didn't seem to harbor any ill will toward the young woman. She took a slow breath, her eyes softening. "It's all right, Tia. I understand. Sometimes we all make judgments that turn out to be wrong." Her voice was calm and forgiving, but there was an edge to it that made Sophie pause. The tone was not one of anger, but one of quiet wisdom, a wisdom that seemed to seep into the very atmosphere of the room. Keanu turned his attention back to his mother. He could see the grace in her actions, the way she chose to handle the situation with dignity. Elaine had always been a woman of few words, but when she spoke, people listened. She had taught him how to navigate life with kindness, with the understanding that no amount of wealth or status could replace the value of compassion and respect. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reeves," Sophie finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to offend you. I was out of line. Please forgive me." Elaine offered her a kind smile, one that seemed to ease the tension in the air. "There's nothing to forgive, Sophie. Just remember that it's important to treat everyone with respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from." Sophie nodded, the weight of the apology hanging between them. She was embarrassed, yes, but she was also grateful. Grateful that Elaine wasn't holding on to anger, that she had chosen the path of grace instead of retribution. But there was still something gnawing at Sophie's mind, a question that she couldn't quite shake. How had she never recognized Elaine? How had she failed to connect the dots? Keanu placed a hand gently on his mother's shoulder, his eyes now shifting back to Sophie. "I think we're done here," he said, his tone softening just enough to show that he wasn't angry, but his point had been made. "I hope this serves as a lesson in humility." Sophie swallowed hard and nodded once more, unable to find her voice. The room felt smaller now, and the weight of her mistake seemed to press down on her with every passing second. She had always been good at reading people, at understanding their worth based on their appearance and actions. But today, she had learned a painful lesson, one that would stay with her long after the encounter was over. As Keanu and Elaine turned to leave, Sophie remained where she stood, her mind reeling. She could feel the eyes of the other employees on her, and she knew they were all wondering the same thing. What had just happened? How had she let something so simple slip through her fingers? Keanu's hand still rested on his mother's shoulder as they made their way toward the door, the atmosphere in the store shifting back to its original stillness. But the tension that had filled the room remained, an undercurrent that couldn't be ignored. Sophie's world had just been shaken, and she knew things would never be the same again. She had crossed a line, one that she couldn't easily erase. As the door closed behind them, sealing them out of the luxury boutique, Sophie felt a knot form in her stomach. Her thoughts were clouded, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what had just occurred. Who was this woman really? And why had she been so quick to judge? What had she missed in her rush to fit everything into neat little boxes? It wasn't until later, when Sophie was alone in the break room, staring at the polished wood of the table before her, that the full weight of the encounter began to hit her. She hadn't just insulted a random elderly woman. She had insulted Keanu Reeves' mother, a woman who had been a part of the Hollywood elite long before Sophie had even thought about stepping into the world of luxury retail. Sophie's mind kept returning to one simple question. How had she never realized who she was talking to? The confusion, the embarrassment, it all piled up, making her feel small in a way she wasn't used to. She had prided herself on being part of this world, of knowing the rules, understanding who belonged and who didn't. But today, she had learned that there was so much more beneath the surface, so much more that she couldn't see just by looking at someone. And as Sophie sat there, lost in her thoughts, she realized that this encounter had changed her in ways she couldn't yet understand. The lesson had been hard, but it was one she wouldn't soon forget. Whether she liked it or not, Sophie knew that she had just been a part of something bigger than herself, something that had shaken her to the core. The question now was how she would move forward. Would she change, or would she remain trapped in her own narrow view of the world? The answers wouldn't come easily, but one thing was for sure: Sophie's journey was just beginning. The days after the incident at the boutique were long and heavy for Sophie. She had hoped it would all just blow over, that the embarrassment she felt would fade into the background as she went about her usual routine. But it didn't. Every time she walked into the store, her colleagues gave her those sidelong glances, those barely perceptible shifts in posture that spoke volumes. Sophie knew they were all thinking the same thing. Asterisk, how could she have been so blind? Asterisk. Her mind replayed the moment with Keanu and his mother over and over, the way he had stood there, calm and composed, while she fumbled with her words. She had prided herself on her ability to read people, to sense when someone was important, when they had power or influence. And yet, here she was, embarrassed in front of one of the most recognized faces in Hollywood, with nothing to show for it except the harsh realization that she had judged someone she knew nothing about. It wasn't just the mistake itself that weighed on her. It was the nagging question of why she had acted the way she had. She had become so caught up in the world of exclusivity and luxury, so immersed in the high-end retail bubble, that she had forgotten the very essence of what she had once believed in: respect. Sophie had grown up with a sense of entitlement, raised to think that appearances were everything. But the encounter with Keanu's mother had shattered that illusion. It had forced her to confront the fact that she had lost touch with the true value of human connection, the importance of seeing people for who they were, not just what they had. But as the days passed, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play, something deeper. What if there was more to Elaine's presence in that store than just a simple shopping trip? What if, in some way, her encounter with Sophie was meant to be a catalyst for something greater? Sophie had never been one to believe in fate, but there was something about that moment that felt too significant to be mere coincidence. Elaine, for her part, had moved on without a second thought. Sophie hadn't expected anything less. From the way Keanu had handled the situation, it was clear that his mother was a woman of quiet strength, a woman who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Elaine had been gracious, forgiving even, but Sophie couldn't help but wonder if she had seen through her. Had she recognized Sophie's own insecurities, the way Sophie had tried to mask her discomfort with arrogance? And what did that mean for the future? Was this a chance for Sophie to learn and grow, or was she doomed to make the same mistakes over and over? Days turned into weeks, and Sophie found herself questioning everything about her career, the choices, and even the life she had built for herself in the luxury world. She began to spend more time observing her clients, wondering if she had missed something crucial in their interactions. Was there more to them than just the designer clothes and diamond rings they wore? Had she become so fixated on appearances that she had stopped seeing the people behind them? It was during one of her quieter shifts that Sophie's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ring of the boutique's phone. She glanced at the clock. It was late in the afternoon, a slow time for customers. When she picked up the receiver, she didn't expect the voice on the other end. "Hello, is this Sophie?" The voice was soft, but unmistakable. It was Keanu's. Her heart skipped a beat. "Ah, yes, this is Sophie. How can I help you?" "I was hoping to speak with you about something," Keanu said, his tone calm, but there was a slight edge to it. Sophie's mind raced. Had he heard about her questioning herself? Was this about her mistake at the boutique? "I'm listening," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think you owe my mother an apology," Keanu said after a brief pause. "And I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I think it's important for you to understand why." Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. "I had already apologized," she stammered. "I didn't mean to offend her." "I know," Keanu replied. "But I think you missed something that day. Something that's more important than just saying sorry. I'd like you to take the time to understand what you did, not just apologize because you feel guilty." Sophie felt a wave of confusion. "What do you mean? What else is there to understand?" Keanu's voice remained calm, but Sophie could sense the depth in his words. "You judged my mother based on her appearance. But there's a lot more to her than what you see. My mom's had a life you can't imagine. And I think you need to reflect on that before you think an apology will fix everything." Sophie's head was spinning. She had tried to put the whole incident behind her, but now it seemed like the universe was throwing her another curveball. Keanu's words were unsettling. What did he mean by "you can't imagine"? What was he implying about his mother's life? And why had he waited this long to call her? "I think you should meet my mother again," Keanu continued. "Not as a sales associate, not as someone who's trying to impress her with your knowledge of luxury, but as someone who truly sees her for who she is." The request was simple, but it left Sophie feeling more nervous than she had in days. "When?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll arrange a time," Keanu replied, "and I think you'll understand once you do." The call ended with no further explanation, leaving Sophie with a flood of questions that wouldn't be answered until she took that next step. What was Keanu trying to tell her? What was Elaine's story? She hadn't expected this. She had assumed that once the incident at the boutique was over, she could move on. But now, it seemed like her world had been thrown into chaos once again. The questions about Elaine's past, about who she truly was, gnawed at her. As Sophie prepared for the meeting with Keanu's mother, she couldn't help but wonder what awaited her. Was this going to be another lesson in humility? Or was there something bigger at play here, something that would change her life forever? The mystery of Elaine, and the life she had lived, hung over Sophie like a shadow. She could no longer ignore it. She had to find out more. And so, with every step she took toward this inevitable confrontation, the weight of the unknown pressed harder on her shoulders. The answers were out there, somewhere, but Sophie had no idea just how deep the truth would go or how much it would cost her to uncover it. Sophie's nerves were on edge as she approached the small, upscale cafe where Keanu had asked her to meet his mother. She had been pacing in her apartment the night before, trying to calm her racing thoughts, but the anxiety only seemed to grow as the time drew nearer. This wasn't just about her mistake anymore. It had become something far more complicated. She had no idea what to expect from this meeting, but the sense of foreboding that had gripped her ever since Keanu's call told her that it was more than just an apology. She arrived early, giving her a few moments to collect herself. The cafe was quiet at this hour, with only a few patrons scattered around, their conversations hushed, as if they were aware of the significance of the moment. Sophie chose a corner table, her eyes scanning the room, but there was no sign of Keanu or Elaine yet. She drummed her fingers nervously on the table, her thoughts running wild. What did Keanu mean when he said she needed to see his mother for who she really was? She had assumed she'd just made a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But now it seemed there was something bigger at play, something that could change the course of her life. The minutes seemed to stretch on, each one heavier than the last. She could hear the faint hum of the cafe's music, the soft clink of coffee cups and plates being set down, but all of it felt distant, as if Sophie were in a bubble. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching until they were right in front of her. Looking up, Sophie was met with the serene face of Keanu Reeves, standing at the table with a warm, almost knowing smile. There was no sign of Keanu, no security, no entourage, just the woman who had been at the center of Sophie's confusion for weeks. "Hello, Sophie," Elaine greeted her, her voice as calm and steady as Sophie remembered from the boutique. It was as if she hadn't a care in the world. Sophie stood quickly, unsure whether to shake hands or just nod. There was a grace to Elaine that seemed to fill the room, an undeniable presence. She could feel the weight of her gaze, and it made Sophie's heart skip a beat. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Sophie said, her voice a little too high-pitched for her liking. She had hoped her anxiety wouldn't show, but it was hard to mask when she was in the presence of someone so composed, so poised. Elaine took a seat across from Sophie without waiting for an invitation, settling into her chair with ease. She exuded a sense of quiet authority, and Sophie found herself instinctively sitting straighter. It was as if everything about Elaine demanded respect, without ever needing to ask for it. "I've been thinking about our last encounter," Elaine said, her tone almost gentle, but there was something firm behind it. "And I want you to understand that what happened at the boutique wasn't about you being wrong per se. It was about perspective." Sophie blinked, unsure how to respond. "Perspective?" she asked, her mind spinning. She wasn't sure what Elaine meant, but it felt as though there was something deep, something significant hidden in her words. Elaine nodded slowly. "You looked at me and made assumptions. Assumptions about who I was, what I was capable of. But you didn't see the person I truly am, not the way you saw your clients, your regular customers. And that's where things got lost." Sophie's stomach twisted. She had been blind to this before, but now that she heard it from Elaine's mouth, it felt like a punch to the gut. She had always assumed that everyone who came into her store was just another customer. She prided herself on her ability to spot the rich and famous, the people who had wealth and influence. She never once considered that maybe those she overlooked could be more than their appearances. I didn't mean to offend you," Sophie managed to say, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. She had apologized before, but this felt different. There was something more she needed to understand, something that wasn't just about saying sorry. Elaine's smile remained, but her eyes darkened slightly. "I know you didn't, but you still need to understand that the world doesn't operate on the surface level. It's not about how much money someone has, how well they dress, or what their social status is. It's about who they are beneath all that." Sophie felt the weight of her words settle on her shoulders. It was a lesson she hadn't truly grasped before, but now it was becoming painfully clear. The world she had been living in, where the rich and famous were elevated above others, where status meant everything, was nothing but an illusion. And she had been part of it. Sophie had judged people, categorized them, without ever taking the time to truly see them. "I don't understand," Sophie said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? Why didn't you say something?" Elaine leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Sophie's. "Because it wasn't important. I didn't need to prove who I was. I wanted to see if you could understand without me telling you. You needed to come to that conclusion on your own." Sophie's mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle slowly began to fall into place. Elaine wasn't just a random woman who had wandered into the boutique that day. She wasn't just Keanu's mother. There was something more to her, something Sophie had failed to see. The question was, why had Keanu insisted on this meeting? Why had he pushed Sophie to confront her assumptions? Suddenly, Sophie felt the ground shift beneath her. The cafe door opened, and Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Keanu walked in, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, a man followed, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a black suit that could only be described as expensive. The man's presence seemed to fill the room instantly, drawing everyone's attention. Keanu's expression was unreadable as he approached the table. Sophie could feel the tension building in the air. She had been so focused on the conversation with Elaine, trying to unravel the mystery of who she was, that she hadn't even noticed the man walking in behind them. He was someone important, someone who seemed to have an aura of power around him. Sophie's heart raced, a mix of excitement and anxiety building within her. What did this man have to do with everything? Was this the moment when the truth would finally come to light? Elaine looked at Keanu, and for the briefest of moments, their eyes locked. There was a quiet understanding between them, a communication that didn't need words. But then, Elaine turned back to Sophie, her expression calm but knowing. "You've only seen part of the picture, Sophie," she said softly. "But there's more. And now, it's time for you to understand what's been right in front of you all along." Sophie's head spun as she glanced back and forth between Keanu, the mysterious man, and Elaine. The answers she had been desperately searching for were now closer than ever, but she could feel the tension building to an unbearable level. What was about to happen? What were they about to reveal? Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change everything, and she had no idea just how deep this story went. Sophie's heart pounded as Keanu and the mysterious man took their seats, the tension in the air thickening with each passing second. The man in the black suit, whose silent presence seemed almost overpowering, locked eyes with her for a moment, and Sophie quickly looked away, feeling as though she were being examined under a magnifying glass. There was an unease in her chest that grew stronger with every breath. She had been on edge ever since Keanu's phone call, but now she was truly beginning to understand that nothing was what it seemed. Keanu, still silent, took the seat beside his mother, his gaze briefly flicking towards Sophie before returning to his hands, which were neatly folded in his lap. He looked calm, composed, but there was a faint trace of something else in his eyes, something that spoke of a hidden depth, a secret that was about to be revealed. Sophie's mind raced as she glanced between him, the man in the suit, and Elaine, who remained unnervingly composed. Then, without warning, the man in the suit leaned forward, his voice low but clear. "Sophie," he said, his tone cold and deliberate, "I think it's time you learn the truth." His words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken revelations. Sophie swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She hadn't been expecting this. The way they were looking at her, the way the tension in the room had shifted, it was as if everything she had thought she understood was about to come crashing down. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she just stared at the man, her mind scrambling for answers. The man continued, unfazed by her silence. "What you don't know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "is that everything you've encountered in this world, the luxury, the wealth, the people you've been surrounding yourself with, it's all been a carefully constructed illusion, a facade." Sophie blinked, trying to process what he was saying. An illusion? She had spent years building a career in the luxury world. Her life was an intricate web of designer labels, high-end customers, and exclusive brands. But now, hearing this man speak so casually about it all being a facade, it made her question everything she thought she knew. The room seemed to close in on her as the man continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've been a part of a much bigger game, Sophie. A game that goes far beyond the boutique you work at or the customers you serve. What you don't understand yet is that the world you've been living in is tied to a much larger network, one that includes people who've spent years building it from the shadows. People like my family." Sophie felt her head spin. Was this some kind of twisted joke? She had no idea where this conversation was heading, but the chills running down her spine told her that whatever was coming next was something she couldn't ignore. She glanced at Elaine, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but the woman's face remained stoic, unreadable. Keanu finally spoke, his voice soft, but with an edge of authority. "This isn't about making you feel bad, Sophie. It's about you understanding that the mistakes you've made go beyond just that one day at the boutique. You've been playing a part in something much bigger than you realize." The weight of his words landed heavily on Sophie. She had thought she was just living her life, doing her job, serving customers. But now, it felt as though everything had been calculated, manipulated in ways she could never have imagined. How deep did this go? And how much of it was her fault for never questioning the world around her? "What do you mean?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean by a bigger game?" The man in the suit leaned in, his eyes cold and calculating. "I'm afraid it's too late for you to back out now," he said. "You're already a part of this world, whether you like it or not. And the truth is, your actions at the boutique were only a small part of a much larger picture. A picture that involves more than just luxury goods and high-end clients. It's about influence, power, and control." Sophie felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. She had been so caught up in her own world, her own ambitions, that she hadn't seen the dark undercurrents swirling just beneath the surface. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. What power was this man talking about? What did they want from her? Elaine finally spoke, her voice low and steady. "You've been living in a world where wealth is everything," she said. "But wealth is a tool. A tool to control, to shape the world around you. And Sophie, you've been a part of that. You just didn't know it." Sophie's head swirled with confusion. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "I never asked for any of this. I just worked hard. I wanted a better life." Elaine's eyes softened for the first time during the conversation. "I know you didn't ask for it," she said quietly. "But now, you're at a crossroads. What you do next will determine whether you continue on the path you've been walking, or if you choose something else entirely. Something that doesn't just involve money and status, but something much deeper." The man in the suit let out a soft laugh, though it was devoid of any warmth. "You think you have a choice," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The truth is, Sophie, you've been in this game for a lot longer than you think. You've just been too blind to see it." Sophie felt as if the walls were closing in around her. The weight of their words, Keanu's, Elaine's, and especially the man in the suit, pressed down on her like a suffocating force. What game was she in? What had she been a part of without even knowing it? She had thought she was just a small player, an employee at a luxury boutique, serving clients. But now, it seemed like her entire existence had been a pawn in a game much bigger than she had ever imagined. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Sophie tried to steady her breathing, her mind racing for answers that seemed just out of reach. What were they trying to say? Why had Keanu insisted on this meeting, on bringing her into this strange, dark world she had never wanted to be a part of? And more importantly, what did they want from her now? The man in the suit finally stood up, breaking the silence. "You'll learn soon enough, Sophie. The question is, will you be ready when the truth comes crashing down?" His words were laced with finality, and as he turned to leave, Sophie felt her chest tighten. Keanu, too, rose from his seat, giving his mother a silent nod. He didn't say anything, but his eyes seemed to be saying more than words ever could. Sophie was left sitting at the table, the air around her thick with unanswered questions. Everything she thought she knew had been turned upside down, and she was only beginning to understand the scope of the lies and manipulation that had been woven into her life. As she sat there, heart pounding, she couldn't help but wonder. What now? What would she do with the truth? The stakes had never been higher, and Sophie knew, with a sinking feeling, that her life would never be the same again. Sophie sat frozen in her seat, the weight of everything that had been said pressing down on her like a vice. Her mind was still reeling, struggling to process the enormity of the situation. The words the man in the suit had spoken echoed in her head, about power, control, and the role she had unknowingly played in this game. For a moment, she couldn't even breathe, her chest tight with a combination of confusion, fear, and disbelief. She had thought her life was ordinary, but now it felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet, like nothing she had believed about her world was real anymore. Keanu and the man had left, their footsteps receding into the distance, but the heavy silence that lingered in their wake was unbearable. Sophie was still staring at the spot where they had been sitting, her thoughts a chaotic blur, when a voice broke through her thoughts. "You're still in shock, aren't you?" Elaine's voice was quiet but sharp, cutting through the haze of confusion that had enveloped Sophie. She turned slowly to face her, her eyes wide with a mix of uncertainty and fear. I don't understand," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "What did they mean? What's really going on here? I thought I was just doing my job. I didn't know anything about any of this." Elaine sighed, her expression softening. She looked at Sophie with a mixture of pity and understanding, as if she could see the young woman's inner turmoil. "I know it's hard to understand right now," she said gently, "but you've been part of something bigger for longer than you realize. Your role in the boutique wasn't just about selling jewelry or serving clients. You were a piece of the puzzle, Sophie. You were the key that unlocked doors that most people would never even know existed." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the blood rushing to her head, the room spinning as her mind tried to make sense of what Elaine was saying. "A piece of the puzzle," Sophie repeated, her voice cracking. "But I'm just an employee. I didn't know anything. I didn't have anything to do with." Elaine interrupted her, her eyes now intense. "You were the one who sold those pieces. You were the one who moved the product. But it wasn't just the jewelry that was important. It was what it represented: connections, influence, and power. Your sales didn't just help the business. They helped to fund a much larger operation. A network of powerful individuals who control far more than you ever realized." Sophie's stomach twisted as the weight of Elaine's words sank in. She had always prided herself on her job, her ability to connect with customers, her eye for the perfect piece of jewelry. But now, it seemed that all of it had been part of something much darker. She had been unknowingly feeding into a system that was about power and control. "I didn't know," Sophie murmured, her voice barely audible. "I swear, I didn't know." Elaine's gaze softened again, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something Sophie couldn't quite place. "I believe you," she said, "but now you need to decide what you're going to do with this knowledge. You've been living in the dark, but now the truth is right in front of you." Sophie looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of her life, the choices, her actions, pressing on her chest. She had been caught up in something much bigger than herself, something that had been controlling her every move without her even realizing it. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow, but there was no denying it. She had been a part of this world, whether she wanted to be or not. "I don't know what to do," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "What do I do now?" Elaine stood up, moving toward the window with a slow, deliberate grace. She looked out at the street below, as if contemplating something far beyond the walls of the cafe. "You have two choices," she said finally, turning back to face Sophie. "You can walk away. You can leave all of this behind and go back to your old life. Or," she paused, letting the silence stretch between them, before continuing, "or you can join us. You can step into this world fully and embrace the power that comes with it. The choice is yours." Sophie felt a surge of panic rise in her chest. She had never imagined she would be faced with a decision like this, a choice that could change the course of her entire life. Her instincts screamed at her to walk away, to turn her back on everything she had learned. But at the same time, a part of her couldn't help but be drawn to the idea of power, of control. It was a seductive pull, one that promised more than she had ever dreamed. I don't know if I can, Sophie whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. How can I even trust you? How do I know that this world isn't just as dangerous as it seems? Elaine's eyes flickered with something close to sadness. You don't know. But trust is something that comes with time. And if you want to survive in this world, you'll need to learn to trust someone. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of the decision Sophie now had to make. She could feel the pull of both paths, each one equally compelling and terrifying. But then, as if the universe had decided to give her a nudge, Sophie's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. The message was from an unknown number, but the words were clear. Asterisk, you're not done yet. The game is just beginning, asterisk. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She stared at the message, her mind racing. What did this mean? Who was this message from? Was it Keanu or someone else involved in this tangled web she had become ensnared in? Elaine watched her closely, a faint smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. I told you, she said softly. You're in this now, Sophie. There's no turning back. Sophie's fingers trembled as she typed a quick response, her mind still reeling. The text message seemed to confirm what she had feared. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The game was still in motion, and Sophie wasn't sure if she was playing it or being played. Her phone buzzed again, another message lighting up the screen. Asterisk will be watching asterisk. Sophie's blood ran cold as she read the words. This was no longer just about jewelry or power. It was about survival. The stakes had been raised higher than she could have ever imagined, and the game had only just begun. Sophie stared at the screen of her phone, her fingers trembling as the message flashed before her eyes. Asterisk will be watching asterisk. The weight of those words sent a chill through her body. It felt as though the walls were closing in, the world she had once known slipping through her fingers like sand. For the first time, she realized just how little control she had over her own life. The text was a reminder that she was no longer in charge of her own fate. But what did she do now? How could she fight back when she didn't even know who was pulling the strings? Elaine, who had been silent until now, seemed to watch her with a keen eye. Her lips were set in a thin line, but there was something almost resigned in her gaze. You're not alone in this, Sophie, she said finally, her voice quieter than before. No matter what choice you make, there's a side you'll have to take. You're already in too deep to get out. Sophie didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers. But she had been asking questions all along, and each answer only seemed to lead to more uncertainty. How could this have happened? How had her life, the simple job at the boutique, turned into something so twisted, so much larger than anything she could have imagined? What do you mean, I'm not alone? Sophie asked, her voice shaky. Who else is involved in this? Who's behind all of this? Elaine took a deep breath, glancing away for a moment before locking eyes with Sophie. There are many players, Sophie. People you've met, and people you haven't. People who are connected in ways you can't even begin to understand. You've seen the world of luxury goods, haven't you? But you've only seen a small corner of it. There's a lot more happening behind the scenes, things that could change everything. Sophie felt a knot form in her stomach. She had never understood the full scope of the industry she was a part of, and now it seemed like everything she thought she knew was a lie. But she didn't want to back down. She couldn't. This wasn't just about luxury jewelry or the boutique anymore. This was about her life, the future. And she wasn't about to let it slip away into the shadows. I don't care about all of that, Sophie said, her voice firmer now, despite the tremor she still felt in her chest. I just want to know what I'm supposed to do. What do I do next? Elaine smiled softly, a flicker of respect in her eyes. You're stronger than you realize, Sophie. That's why they've been watching you. They see something in you, something valuable. Whether you like it or not, you've already made your choice. You've been swept into this world, and now you have to decide whether you want to shape it or be shaped by it. Sophie's mind whirled. It wasn't a choice she could make lightly, but Elaine's words hit home. She had already chosen, hadn't she? Every decision she had made up until now had led her here, to this point, and there was no turning back. The truth was, Sophie wasn't sure if she was ready to take on the weight of the power and influence that had come with this world. But she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and the sudden sound only added to the tension that seemed to hang in the air. Elaine raised an eyebrow, then moved to open the door without a word. When the door swung open, Sophie froze. Standing in the doorway was Keanu. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes, something guarded, as though he had been carrying a weight he hadn't shared with her. He stepped into the room, his gaze flicking briefly to Elaine before settling on Sophie. "I thought you might need to hear this from me," Keanu said, his voice low and measured. "You deserve to know the truth." Sophie felt her pulse quicken. She had been expecting answers, but not from him, not like this. "What truth?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Keanu looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words. "I'm not just the son of a wealthy businesswoman," he said slowly. "I'm a part of something bigger. Something much bigger than you realize. My family. We've been building this network for years, and now it's time for you to understand exactly what that means." Sophie's mind raced. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was still so much she didn't understand. "What are you saying?" she demanded. "What is this network? What's really going on here?" Keanu sighed, looking away for a moment, as if searching for the right words. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, tinged with something that sounded almost like regret. "The jewelry, the luxury goods, it's not just about the items. It's about control, influence. We've been using this industry to establish connections, to build power. But that's not the full picture. There's a bigger plan in motion, Sophie. A plan that involves people like you." Sophie shook her head, struggling to process the revelation. "You're telling me that everything I've been doing, all of it, it's been part of some grand plan. A game I didn't even know I was playing?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, and I'm sorry you didn't know. But that's how it works. We use the things people want, status, wealth, luxury, to create the relationships we need. And now it's time for you to decide which side you're on." Sophie felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. She had never asked for any of this. She had just wanted a simple life, a career she could be proud of. But now, she was tangled in a web of power and influence that went far beyond anything she could have imagined. "So what happens now?" Sophie asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What do I do?" Keanu looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and something else, something darker. "Now, you have to make your choice. You can join us. You can help us build this empire. Or you can walk away, knowing that the world you've been living in is far more dangerous than you ever thought." Sophie's heart raced. She had never been good at making decisions under pressure. But now, she realized, this wasn't just any decision. This was a choice that would define the rest of her life. In the end, Sophie knew she couldn't walk away. She had already come too far, been through too much. She might not understand everything yet, but she couldn't turn her back on this world, not when the stakes were this high. She took a deep breath, standing tall. "I'll stay, but I need to know everything. I need to understand exactly what I'm getting into." Keanu nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting her answer. "Then you'll learn the truth. But be careful, Sophie. There's no turning back from here." As the weight of her decision settled over her, Sophie couldn't help but feel a strange mix of fear and excitement. She was about to step into a world she had never known, a world of power, wealth, and influence. And though she didn't know what lay ahead, she knew one thing for sure: her life would never be the same again.